The bells of the great September fell silent on the 7th day after King Tommen's death, leaving King's Landing in a hush that felt like a held breath. The boy king, gentle in spirit and impressionable in mind, had been the last living, if only nominal, Baratheon on the throne. In truth, his claim had been tenuous from the start, but few in Westeros dared voice that suspicion while he lived. Now, with the Iron Throne vacant once more, and countless rumors swirling about who had orchestrated or contributed to the king's tragic end, the capital stood on a precarious precipice. The scorching summer sun hung high above the city walls, unrelenting and merciless, as though the gods themselves bore witness to the realm's uncertain future. A mass of onlookers had crammed the streets for the funeral procession, many draped in mourning black or silent in their shock, silent, too, in their fear. Word had already reached commoners and nobles alike that, with Cersei Lannister in disgrace, her power eroded by recent humiliations, and no clear heir from the Baratheon line, the realm's many great houses might soon be at one another's throats again. Grand Maester Pycelle was dead, replaced by an obscure acolyte from the Citadel who could barely keep up with the tension swirling about the Red Keep. The High Sparrow had vanished not long after the wildfire explosion that had claimed so many of his followers. Those who survived believed him dead. Many of his faith militant had since disbanded or retreated, powerless without leadership or a figurehead to guide them. The mood of the city, always an echo of the palace's inner workings, was one of deep unease. People sensed a sudden power vacuum. The Lannisters still had gold, but far fewer allies than before, their influence waning rapidly. The Targaryen girl was rumored to have dragons across the sea, but she had not arrived yet. Various claimants might emerge or return. Stannis had died, but rumors swirled about his surviving forces, or about other Baratheon lines that might reappear, legitimate or not. Yet, for all these looming possibilities, the Tyrells remained. Their presence in the city had grown subtle but undeniable. Margaery Tyrell had been queen consort to multiple kings, and with Tommen dead, she stood at a crossroads of inheritance and influence. It was not her name that would claim the throne, some whispered. It was the name of her house, a powerful, wealthy family whose bountiful grain and harvest fed nearly half of Westeros. The Tyrell sigil, a golden rose on a green field, was frequently overlooked in songs of heroic or tragic warfare. Yet it had become the bulwark of the South, blossoming with wealth and cunning in equal measure. They had once pinned their fortunes on alliances with the Lannisters, but that bet had proven precarious. Within the Red Keep, Margaery Tyrell stood outside Tommen's chamber for what felt like the last time. The flickering light of sunset streamed through narrow windows, casting dancing shadows across her face. Dust motes drifted in the still air. Her once regal posture was now weighted with sorrow, though her eyes gleamed with the careful, subdued, calculating intelligence that had always lurked behind them. She wore the color of mourning, a gown of midnight black with subtle golden embroidery depicting vines and roses. To all the world, it appeared a token of remembrance. To those who knew her best, it was a quiet statement. The Tyrell rose flourished even in darkness. In the hall beside her loomed Ser Loras Tyrell, newly released from the Faith's dungeons after months of torment and forced confessions. He was thinner now, a haunted look in his eyes that had replaced the once proud sparkle of the Night of Flowers. The warmth of his sister's hand against his forearm was one of the few comforts that kept his mind steady. Together, they had watched the last of Tommen's personal guard wheel the young king's draped body toward the sept for the final rites. A hush stretched between them. "It is done," Margaery said softly, her voice uncertain. She had not truly loved Tommen in the way a woman loves a husband, but she had cared for him, cared for his soft heart, for the kindness that had distinguished him from so many. "We must leave him to the gods now." Loras's lips parted, but he said nothing, only gave a solemn nod. Then, with a weariness that belied his youth, he placed a trembling hand on Margaery's shoulder. "What will become of us, sister? Of our house?" His voice was low, laced with doubt and fear. A year ago, he had been a celebrated knight, unstoppable in justs and fearless in battle. Now, each question seemed more fragile than the last. Margaery let out a breath, glancing down the corridor. Farther down stood several Lannister guards, who quietly monitored the comings and goings. Their presence only served as a reminder that the alliance with House Lannister had been fraught with suspicion and duplicity from the start. In better times, Loras might have quipped about needing to keep his voice down. Now she simply replied with caution. "We cannot remain vassals to a ruined cause," she said, stepping in closer so only he could hear. "There is opportunity here. The realm is uncertain. The line of succession is more tangled than ever. Our grandmother is at Highgarden, gathering support from our bannermen. My father is on his way. We must make certain that the Tyrell name stands above the rest." Ser Loras closed his eyes for a moment, as though pained by the thought of more strategy and politics. His captivity had almost broken him. Yet he was still a Tyrell, and some ember of pride in his house remained. "Then we must stand with you," he managed. "Tell me what you need me to do." In that moment, the memory of her grandmother's voice came to Marjorie's mind. Olenna Tyrell, known as the Queen of Thorns, had always advised her that cunning and subtlety might win more allies than an army of knights. But here in the capital, subtlety was no longer just an option. It was a necessity, at least until the right moment. At Marjorie's instruction, Loras quietly slipped away to his chambers, surrounded by a few loyal Tyrell guards. Marjorie turned her gaze to a window that overlooked the city. Below, the crowd still stood thick in the streets. Smoke from countless cookfires rose into the twilight sky, and somewhere among them, she knew, were countless rumors and whispered calculations. The city was a powder keg of hidden alliances and frustrated ambitions. But House Tyrell would have its day. That evening, Marjorie arranged for a meal with Cersei Lannister. It was a small supper in a private antechamber. A single table sat near a window that overlooked the Blackwater Rush, the faint lights of ships in the distance glinting upon the water. The air was filled with the scent of summer stew and roasted vegetables. Torches flickered along the walls, and the music of crickets wafted in through the open shutters. Across from Marjorie sat Cersei, dressed in black, her expression set in stone. With Tommen gone, the woman had nothing left to lose, or so it seemed. All her children were dead. Cersei's eyes glinted with something akin to madness, or perhaps emptiness, when she settled her gaze upon Marjorie. "Have you brought me here to gloat?" Cersei asked, her voice low. She did not reach for the wine that had been poured for her. "If so, spare me. If you wish me to supplicate before you, that is even less likely." Marjorie's face was a perfect mask of composure. "I only wish to offer my condolences, Your Grace. My presence is no threat." The older woman's lips curved into a mirthless smile. "No threat," she repeated bitterly. "I recall hearing those same words when you first married Joffrey, and later when you wed my Tommen." Marjorie lowered her gaze in a show of regret. "That is fair," she said quietly. "Our houses have not always had a healthy bond. But we share grief, do we not?" Cersei stiffened. Something in Marjorie's tone, perhaps the gentle attempt to empathize, grated on her. In that moment, she reminded Marjorie of a cornered lion, all fangs and desperate fury. Yet she did not lash out physically. She merely stared for several heartbeats, the tension thick in the air. "Condolences, then?" Cersei said at last, her tone clipped. Her eyes flicked to the window, where one could almost hear the city's fear carried on the wind. "But that is not all, is it? Speak plainly. What do you want from me?" Marjorie resisted the urge to shift in her seat. She had prepared for this conversation meticulously, but she knew how quickly Cersei's moods could erupt. "I want peace. The realm has had enough bloodshed, enough kings rising and falling. The Tyrells do not seek to take the throne by force." Cersei's eyes narrowed. "Yet you speak of the Iron Throne as though it is free for the taking." At that, Marjorie bowed her head slightly. "Forgive me, I only meant that the transition can be eased. Our house has the food, the resources, and the political connections to hold the realm together. In time, if the lords of Westeros consent, we could see a new ruler crowned. One who can bring stability." She let the implication hang in the air, though she did not speak the name. Marjorie Tyrell. For a moment, Cersei said nothing. Slowly, she leaned back in her chair, her arms folded. The lines of grief upon her face deepened. In that silent moment, Marjorie wondered if the woman would lash out with insults, or if she might simply call the guards to arrest Marjorie for treason. But Cersei only let out a quiet laugh, mirthless and weary. "You think you can sweep aside the Lannisters so easily?" she asked, her voice low, pained. "We are not finished yet. Even if our hold is less certain, do not underestimate us." Marjorie nodded. "I have never underestimated you, Your Grace, nor do I underestimate Jaime or the gold of Casterly Rock. But the realm is tired of war. The people are hungry. Winter could come any year now, and we cannot endure another bloody conflict among the great houses. I am offering you partnership of a sort. The Tyrell banners and the Lannister banners, marching together, under a new monarchy that does not hail from incest or hearsay." Cersei's lips curled in a sneer at the mention of incest, but she did not deny it. Once, such an accusation would have roused her to fury, but now it seemed to roll off her. "Let me guess," she said, forcing her voice to remain even. "You believe you would be that new monarch?" Marjorie's eyes did not waver. "I believe I am suited to lead. Our house is wealthy, we have the love of the people. Highgarden is known for generosity and prosperity, and I have been a queen consort twice. I understand the capital, I understand how to manage the court. I want to end the bloodshed and let the fields of the Reach feed the entire realm." Cersei stared at her for a long moment. Then she reached for the wine, took a slow sip. "So you want my blessing?" It was a statement, not a question. The words felt cold. Marjorie answered, her voice as soft as the torchlight. "I want your acceptance that this is the best path forward for the Seven Kingdoms, and for you. Should the Tyrells ascend, I would not see House Lannister cast into the dust. I would see your family retain your lands, your wealth, your dignity. We can formalize alliances that protect Casterly Rock in perpetuity." Cersei set the wine cup down, her gaze distant. "My children are gone, Marjorie. They were all that mattered to me. Now you come to me with this talk of a new monarchy, as if it might fill the void. There is no filling that void." She let out a slow exhale. "But in my grief, do I wish for the entire realm to collapse around me? Possibly, or perhaps not." She fell silent again, as if waging an internal war. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. "You are cunning, I grant you that. You might just manipulate half the kingdom into bending the knee." Marjorie did not press further. She could sense Cersei's turmoil, the rawness of her loss. "Think on it," she said at last, quietly rising from her seat. "I only ask that you consider it. We are willing to protect your legacy and to rewrite history in a way that spares your name. So let the Lannisters' hold remain in the west, and let the new crown rise in the south." She bowed her head respectfully and slipped out, leaving Cersei alone with her thoughts, alone to dwell on the empty place in her heart. The following weeks saw a flurry of secret meetings, veiled correspondences, and subtle movements of troops. Though the city's rumor mill churned relentlessly, House Tyrell ensured that none could say for certain what their next step might be. Marjorie moved through the corridors of the Red Keep with careful grace, her retinue of handmaidens and loyal knights quiet, respectful, never openly defiant. She dined in public with lords from the Crownlands, listened patiently to their woes about bandits on the roads and high taxes in the capital. In private, she dispatched carefully worded letters to the lords of the Reach, urging them to prepare to send more soldiers. She asked them not to brandish swords, not to provoke open conflict, but to stand ready. Elsewhere in the realm, word began to spread. House Stark had retaken Winterfell in the north, thanks to the actions of Sansa Stark and the newly resurrected rumors of Jon Snow. House Bolton was shattered. In the Vale, Peter Baelish's machinations continued, though uncertain. In Dorne, Prince Doran was dead, replaced by Ilaria Sand's brief regency that ended in chaos. The realm was as fractious as it had ever been, each region simmering with the possibility of further turmoil. And so, Ironically, Marjorie Tyrell's promise of stability began to sound appealing to many. They might not love the idea of a queen from Highgarden, but they loved the thought of war and bloodshed even less. Mace Tyrell arrived in King's Landing with a company of Tyrell knights and bannermen, including Garland Tyrell, the second eldest son of the family. Handsome and skilled, Garland had never garnered the same fame as Loras, but he was no less a warrior. He also possessed a steadiness, a calm logic that served as a counterbalance to Loras's sometimes impetuous nature. As they approached the city gates, the common folk turned out to watch, uncertain but curious. The Tyrell sigil flew in the summer wind, bright and full of promise. Soldiers tossed coins to children or handed out bread to the poor, a gesture orchestrated by Marjorie, who had always understood the value of good publicity. Soon enough, the crowds were throwing rose petals before the cavalry, hailing them with cautious optimism. Within the Red Keep's courtyard, Marjorie greeted her father and brother with a warm, though formal, embrace. Mace Tyrell's chest puffed with pride at the accolades, though he was quick to remark on the city's stench. "I always forget how wretched King's Landing smells in the heat," he grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ah, but a cup of wine and a warm bed will see me through." Garland, ever the dutiful son, offered Marjorie a respectful bow. "Sister," he said, "I hope the city has treated you better than it treated Loras." His smile was affectionate, though the mention of Loras's ordeal in the Faith's prison hung in the air. Loras himself stood aside, still pale and drawn. Marjorie gave Garland a measured nod. "We have weathered the storm so far," she replied. "Now we must plan our next move carefully." Together, the Tyrell family and their closest retainers withdrew behind closed doors, away from prying eyes. There, Marjorie laid out her vision, that the Tyrells should not simply posture for power, but must seize the chance to make their claim on the Iron Throne known. She had weighed all the factors. She believed the small council, now in tatters, would not stand firmly against her if she moved with caution. The Lords of the Reach were steadfastly loyal. Many lords in the Stormlands remained uncertain or leaderless. The Westerlands might resist, unless Cersei came to an arrangement. The Riverlands, still torn by the aftermath of the Frey's betrayals, might prefer a stable ruler. And the North was more focused on ensuring it never bowed again to a tyrant, so perhaps peace could be reached with them. "As we speak," Marjorie said, pacing in the chamber, "the Crown's finances are in shambles. The Lannisters cannot pay every debt on their own. The Iron Bank of Bravos grows restless. Our harvests can provide food and trade goods to refill the coffers. If I propose a plan to the Iron Bank, backed by our gold from Highgarden, they may be inclined to support a Tyrell monarchy. A new, untainted crown might seem like a safer bet than the legacy of the Lannisters." Mace nodded, his expression eager. Yes, the bankers and the merchants all love gold and security. But what if the Targaryen girl crosses the narrow sea with her dragons? We have had no word of her arrival, but rumors say she is gathering ships. Garland tilted his head, thoughtful. If she does arrive, she may find the city united behind our banners. If the people love us, perhaps they will not rise in her name. Dragons or not, she cannot conquer an entire realm if we do not give her cause to appear a liberator. Marjorie inclined her head. Precisely. Besides, who knows if she will truly risk an assault on the capital the moment she arrives? It could be that she lands in Dorne or the Stormlands, or tries to court the North. By then, if the crown is secure, she may negotiate. Loras stood by the window, quiet as he stared out at the city below. He turned and spoke with a subdued confidence. "The city needs a strong protector. If we show ourselves as that protector, if we restore order and feed them, they will prefer us to the memory of the Mad King's line." He paused, swallowing hard. "I can lead the King's Guard, if you will have me, Marjorie." She smiled kindly. "We will see what the future holds, dear brother. For now, rest and recover. We need your strength." Thus, the seeds were sown. Marjorie used her presence among the courtiers to quietly test the waters. She floated ideas about what a new monarchy would do. She promised the bread would be cheaper, the harvest more accessible, the taxes reformed, the roads safer. She smiled and listened to complaints with a patient ear. Bit by bit, whispers began, that Margaery Tyrell might ascend to the throne not by right of marriage but by right of the realm's urgent need for stability and prosperity. It did not take long for some factions within the Red Keep to push back. Kevan Lannister, uncle to the late King Tommen, stood as the last significant Lannister presence in the capital aside from Cersei and Jaime. Kevan had been a practical, cautious man, once the hand of the king. Though wary of fighting a new civil war, he was equally wary of letting power slip from the Lannisters' grasp. Ser Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, was yet recuperating from his own disillusionment with the faith and the fracturing of his family. Nevertheless, Kevan summoned Margaery to a small council meeting in the Tower of the Hand, where he made his objections known. "Your ladyship," he addressed her stiffly, "these rumors that you might claim the Iron Throne would be considered treason by many. The line of succession is not something one simply steps into." Margaery sat calmly, hands folded on the table. "With respect, my lord," she replied. "What line of succession remains? Tommen was the last. Myrcella died in Dorne. Joffrey died at his wedding. Are we to pass the crown to a distant Lannister cousin? Or shall we tear the realm apart to find a Targaryen? The lords of Westeros crave a solution, not endless war." Kevan pressed his lips together, exchanging a glance with Pycelle's replacement, a scrawny new Grand Maester who frowned deeply. "Even so, we must be careful. If House Tyrell simply claims the throne, the other great houses might see it as another usurpation. War could follow." Margaery let out a soft breath, carefully measured. "It need not come to that. If the realm's lords consent at a great council, or at least enough of them, it will be a peaceful transition. That is my intention. The Tyrell bannermen already favor it. The Stormlands are in disarray and might welcome stability. The River Lords have suffered greatly under the Freys and Lannisters. They will not weep for a change in power if it promises them relief." Kevan drummed his fingers on the table. "You speak of a great council. When do you propose it, and where?" "Here, in King's Landing," Margaery answered. "Within the next moon's turn. Let each great house or its designated representative attend, so we can discuss the future of the crown. Whether they wish to enthrone me or another, let that be decided there. But let us do it without bloodshed." She paused, letting that sink in. "You may remain hand of the king, if you wish, or you may become my hand, if that would comfort you." He stiffened, uncertain. "You are generous, but the Lannisters—" She leaned forward. "We do not seek to ruin House Lannister, Lord Kevan. We seek to spare the realm. I know how much you cared for your nephew and his children." She let a note of genuine sympathy color her voice. "I share in that grief. I know you do not wish to see the realm torn apart again. This path, I believe, is best for all." Kevan hesitated, studying her with eyes grown keen from a lifetime of politics. He seemed to weigh her sincerity. Then he sighed heavily and looked aside. "I will call for a great council, though I cannot guarantee every house will respond favorably." He paused, adding in a more subdued tone, "I still have loyalties to my house and to the memory of my brother Tywin. But if the alternative is chaos, then perhaps it is time for a new approach." Thus was the first step. Over the following weeks, ravens flew to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, bearing invitations to a great council at King's Landing. Each letter urged peace, asked for calm, and promised open discussion about the realm's future. Some lords scoffed, sure that this was yet another ploy by a cunning court faction. Some, half a continent away, merely watched and waited. Others, particularly in the Reach, accepted readily and prepared to march or sail for the capital. Within King's Landing, the common folk buzzed with talk of a new monarchy. Margaery's promise of cheaper bread rations, distributed from the immense Tyrell grain stores, quickly endeared her to the population. Stewards from Highgarden and nearby farmland oversaw an influx of fresh produce, giving a sense of bounty to the city that had rarely known plenty. As the small folk found themselves less hungry and less threatened by the gold cloaks, they began to speak well of the Tyrells. Some began calling Marjorie their Rose Queen in hushed corners of the markets. The Lannister soldiers in the city were not so easily swayed. Many of them were loyal to the Lion Banner and found the idea of a Tyrell monarchy distasteful. However, their pay was late, their rations meager, and morale low. Tyrell gold began to line certain palms. In brothels and inns, men in green livery spent coin freely, forging friendships with bored Lannister guards. This subtle infiltration, orchestrated by Mace and Garland, gradually softened the hostility. Those who could not be bribed would, at least, be outnumbered if it came to conflict. Cersei's power was all but diminished, and Kevin's willingness to host the Great Council further eroded the Lion's pride in the city. At the same time, Marjorie knew better than to present herself merely as a cunning politician. She spent time at the Great September, partially rebuilt after its destruction, lighting candles and praying with the small folk who had lost loved ones in the recent turmoil. She gave gentle speeches promising mercy, offering to help orphans, widows, and the wounded. While cynics might roll their eyes at such pageantry, it nonetheless captured hearts. Marjorie had always known how to charm the masses. She was more than an upstart queen. She was rapidly becoming a beloved figure among the common people. Some turned her acts of generosity into songs, passing them from street to street. The so-called Floral Empire, so the rumor went, would bring color and life back to the realm. As the date of the Great Council approached, King's Landing bustled with the arrival of various lords and envoys. The banners of the Stormlands, the Crownlands, the Vale, the Reach, and even some from the Westerlands and Riverlands fluttered along the city's main thoroughfares. Dorne, ravaged by internal strife, sent only a few representatives of uncertain loyalty. The North did not send any official delegation at first. There was talk that the Starks were consumed with re-establishing their rule in Winterfell and preparing for a potential threat from beyond the Wall. Or perhaps they simply did not trust another southern monarch. Regardless, the city was crowded, the tension thick, as the day of deliberation dawned. The Great Council itself was held in the throne room of the Red Keep, though the Iron Throne sat ominously empty at the far end. Sunlight streamed in through high windows, illuminating a polished floor that had seen more blood and betrayal than many cared to remember. Rows of benches were arranged in a semicircle for the gathering of lords and their retainers. Guards in Tyrell livery stood beside gold cloaks along the perimeter, their faces stern. Marjorie, dressed in regal green and gold, stood at the front with her family, maintaining an air of humility rather than simply seating herself on the throne. Kevan Lannister stood to one side, resolute and grave, representing what was left of the Lannister power in the capital. The hush in the chamber was broken only by the soft shuffling of feet and the distant caw of gulls outside the windows. Lord Edmure Tully, newly released from Frye captivity after the Riverlands unrest, was present, somewhat wan and uncertain. Lord Randall Tarley, a bannerman of the Tyrells and a fierce military commander, stood with the Tyrell retinue, though his eyes betrayed some skepticism about a woman taking the throne. From the Vale, a small group of lords arrived without their nominal guardian, Peter Baelish, who remained elusive. The Stormlands seat had been vacant since the death of Stannis, and the uncertain lines of succession there meant no single voice spoke for that region, though several lesser lords bickered among themselves. Dorne's representatives, a pair of minor nobles, watched carefully, offering no immediate commentary. The Westerlands contingent was also small. Few Lannisters beyond Kevan had come, but some lesser lords from that region had attended. Their stony faces suggested they were not eager to see power drift south. Marjorie began with a brief address. She stood at the center of the semicircle, her voice clear and resonant in the vaulted chamber. "My lords and ladies," she said, "we gather at a time of great uncertainty. The king is dead, the line of succession is broken, and war has ravaged this realm for too long. I come before you not as a conqueror, but as a daughter of Westeros who wishes to see our lands prosper again. House Tyrell has ever sought the well-being of the people, from the poorest small folk to the highest lords. With Highgarden's bounty, we can feed this city and beyond. With your aid, we can restore stability. No more senseless wars. No more children lost. No more fields burned and salted. She paused, letting the silence hang, letting her words sink in. I propose that we, as a council, select the next ruler based on who can best serve the realm. Some might argue for a distant Targaryen claim. Some might argue for a Lannister cousin. Yet I stand ready to offer myself, and House Tyrell, to fulfill the role that Westeros needs. Let the choice be made here, by those who represent the many corners of our land. Whoever rules must be accepted by the people, not by the sword alone. That is why I have called this council, to avoid more bloodshed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A few lords whispered to one another, uncertain. One raised a hand, stepping forward. He was an older man, Lord Verwell, a bannerman of Highgarden. Will you promise to maintain the faith of the Seven, to keep the king's peace, and to protect our borders? He asked, clearly supportive of the Tyrell cause but wanting public assurances. I do so promise, Marjorie replied, and I shall also ensure the debts of the crown are honored. The Iron Bank will be satisfied. Commerce will flourish. We have an opportunity here to unite behind a symbol of growth, not destruction. Another voice came from the Stormlands side. What of the others who might claim the throne? What if the Targaryen queen arrives with dragons? Will you yield the crown to her by right? Marjorie pursed her lips, mindful that many might be uneasy about Daenerys Targaryen's rumored approach. I will not yield Westeros to foreign invasion, but neither will I cast the realm into war if it can be avoided. If Daenerys Targaryen arrives, we shall negotiate. If she insists on conquering by fire and blood, she must face a united front. Westeros shall not be a battlefield for yet another war of conquest. A slender lord from the Vale stepped forward with a steely gaze. And what of the north? The Starks are retaking their homeland. Will they submit? Marjorie's answer was poised, though she had carefully considered it already. I will extend my hand in friendship to the north. Should they wish to remain within the Seven Kingdoms, they will find a fair and compassionate sovereign. If they desire independence, as some rumors suggest, we may talk of peaceful arrangements to ensure the safety of both realms. My father has proposed sending an envoy north to open negotiations. A subdued hush fell. Lord Edmure Tully eventually rose, clearing his throat. My lords, he began. My experience with the Lannisters and Freys has taught me the cost of betrayal and the price of war. My family has suffered much, as have the Riverlands. Lady Marjorie once showed me kindness. Her house is powerful, wealthy, and, dare I say it, better loved than the Lannisters at this point. I, for one, would see her seated on the throne, provided we come to fair terms for all the regions of Westeros. This nod of support from the Riverlands heartened Marjorie's allies. Murmurs intensified. In the corners, a few lords openly conferred, while others simply watched. Cersei Lannister was nowhere to be seen. Kevan Lannister stood with a solemn nod and said, House Lannister has no direct claimant to the Iron Throne, nor do we wish to plunge the realm into further conflict. We stand ready to negotiate terms of peace, and we will abide by the decision of this council, if it remains fair. Should the realm choose Lady Marjorie, we will lend our support as we can, and we will remain lords of the Westerlands. He added that last part with an edge, ensuring that no one would question the Lannisters' hold on Casterly Rock. A hush settled again, as the crucial moment approached, the question of how to formalize a decision. Lords murmured about a show of hands or a formal vote. Some spoke of a written ballot. Others worried about intimidation. Finally, Kevan Lannister, as interim steward of the crown, suggested each region declare its stance in turn, beginning with the Crownlands themselves. One by one, the lords rose. Some gave their backing to Marjorie Tyrell as queen, citing her wealth, her proven ability to manage King's Landing, and her vow to feed and protect the people. Others expressed reservations, uncertain about the future. But few suggested an alternative. The single voice that did, an aged Stormlands knight, muttered about a rumored Baratheon cousin who might press a claim, but he was quickly drowned out by the more pressing concerns of the realm. By the end of the session, it was clear that the majority would rally behind the Tyrell banner, albeit with certain conditions about taxes, local autonomy, and official pardons. In that monumental assembly, with tension so thick one could cut it with a knife, Kevin Lannister finally turned to Margaery Tyrell and spoke the words that would alter the course of history. "The Great Council of Westeros has agreed to acknowledge your claim. If you will accept this mantle, we call upon you now to speak the vows of the realm's protector." Margaery felt a tremor in her chest. For all her composure, she turned her gaze to the empty Iron Throne, a towering, jagged mass of melted swords. Once a symbol of Targaryen conquest, it had passed to Baratheons, Lannisters, and now, if the realm so decided, to Tyrells. She walked forward, each step echoing in the hush. At the foot of the dais, she knelt, head bowed. The new Grand Maester stood to the side, a copy of the seven-pointed star clutched in his trembling hands. Though the Great September was still under reconstruction, the faith had managed to muster enough presence for a semblance of ceremony. With soft solemnity, Margaery recited vows long used in coronations and oath-takings. To uphold justice, protect the weak, maintain the faith, and preserve the peace. When she finished, she rose and approached the throne. An attendant, a steward from Highgarden, carefully placed a slim, golden circlet upon her brow. This was no Baratheon stag crown, nor a Targaryen dragon crown. It was a crown of roses, wrought in gold and set with tiny emeralds, subtle but undeniably regal. She turned to face the assembled lords, her posture tall, her expression calm. "Long live Queen Margaery," came the first cry. It was Loras, his voice hoarse yet proud. Others took up the chant, uncertain at first, but gradually rising in volume and fervor. "Long live the Queen!" The echoes bounced off the hall's walls until it seemed the very stones were chanting. Margaery, the Rose Queen, turned slowly, ascending the final step to settle herself upon the Iron Throne. It was uncomfortable, as the stories said, pointed edges and barely hidden barbs. But she did not flinch. Her hands settled on the armrests. She surveyed the sea of lords, her new subjects, with a mixture of relief and determination. So began the Tyrell dynasty in King's Landing. The official coronation was yet to come, a grander affair, perhaps, once the city's sept was fully rebuilt. But for all intents and purposes, Margaery Tyrell had claimed the Iron Throne. Over the next weeks, word spread like wildfire across the continent. The lords who had not attended the council found themselves faced with a fait accompli. Margaery was crowned by a great council majority. If they defied her, they risked standing alone. The Tarleys, Florence, Hightowers, Oakhearts, and other major houses of the Reach rallied their banners in support, ensuring that any open rebellion would face a formidable alliance. Queen Margaery's first weeks on the throne were busy, fraught with political minefields. She restored a semblance of order to the small council, appointing Mace Tyrell as Master of Ships. Though his talents were questionable, she needed to keep him close. Garland Tyrell as Master of Laws, and Ser Loras Tyrell as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Though Loras's health still required rest, Kevin Lannister, in a move that surprised some, accepted the position of Hand of the Queen, continuing his service to the realm. She recognized that keeping the Lannisters in the royal court helped maintain a fragile peace. A new Master of Coin was selected from among the trusted stewards of Highgarden, someone skilled in financial negotiations who could bargain with the Iron Bank. The new Grand Maester was also confirmed. Barristers, scribes, and advisors bustled in and out of sessions to implement the Queen's initial reforms. One of the earliest mandates from Queen Margaery was a thorough revision of the city's food distribution. Grain shipments from the Reach were coordinated daily, ensuring that loaves of bread reached the poorest districts at subsidized prices. This, she declared, was a short-term measure until the city's stores and trade routes recovered fully from the last round of warfare. As a result, the people's grumbling eased. Rumors of bread riots and chaos subsided. The Queen's reputation for generosity began to spread. Some called it calculated, but few complained about full bellies. Secondly, Margaery ordered a slow but steady purge of corrupt officials within the city watch. A careful approach indeed. She did not want to antagonize the Gold Cloaks en masse. Instead, she had Garland Tyrell discreetly investigate the worst offenders. The results were quietly presented, and those men were dismissed or arrested for treasonous activities. Loyal men from the Reach and a few from the Westerlands, to maintain balance, were installed in their place. Gradually, the Gold Cloaks came under the Queen's firm control. Religious matters, however, proved trickier. The faith militant had been shattered by the wildfire explosion, but pockets of fanaticism lingered. Some worshippers denounced Margaery as a false queen because she had been queen consort to multiple kings. A suspicious pattern, they said. Others believed the destruction of the Great September was an omen that the gods had abandoned King's Landing. She met with the highest surviving septons and septas, offering to fund the sept's reconstruction. They accepted, somewhat warily, though they pressed for moral oversight of the court. Margaery, in turn, made vague promises about supporting pious works and devout charities. Quietly, she sought to keep the faith at arm's length. She would not allow them to regain the power they held under the High Sparrow's tyranny. Amid these domestic challenges, letters from beyond the capital carried weighty news. The North had indeed crowned Jon Snow as king in the North, or so rumor said, though he was rumored to be no trueborn Stark. Sansa Stark stood as Lady of Winterfell. Reports trickled down that the North faced more than just the aftermath of Bolton rule, that there were stories of White Walkers, the undead. Most Southern lords dismissed these as the same old legends repeated for centuries. Margaery, for her part, could not ignore these rumors entirely, not when they came from multiple sources. She sent a polite letter to Winterfell, congratulating the Starks on retaking their home and offering an olive branch. The Tyrell crown recognized the North's right to self-govern, should they choose, and invited them to open trade of grain in anticipation of winter. She did not expect a warm reply, but it was a gesture of peace. To the east, rumors of Daenerys Targaryen's approach intensified. She had apparently left Meereen in the hands of local governance and was sailing west with an armada. She had 3 dragons, grown large, if travelers' tales were to be believed. In Dorne, which had once pledged to support her cause, the situation was murky. Elaria Sand had seized power but faced her own uprisings. It was anyone's guess whether Daenerys would land in Dorne, the Stormlands, or even the Reach. Queen Margaery weighed these possibilities carefully, ensuring the royal fleet, such as it was, and coastal defenses were on alert. A direct confrontation might be disastrous, especially if the city faced dragonfire. But Margaery bet on diplomacy. She quietly prepared letters for the Targaryen queen, in case an emissary arrived with demands. She believed that if he could promise a peaceful alliance, and if Daenerys was not hellbent on retaking the throne by force alone, there might be a path to avoid a cataclysmic war. In the capital, life began to stabilize under the new regime. Merchants returned to the markets, trade ships docked in the harbor, and the crown's finances slowly found new footing under the stewardship of House Tyrell. Gardens sprouted around the Red Keep. Margaery ordered the neglected corners of the castle grounds replanted with roses, vines, and aromatic herbs. To the city's inhabitants, it felt like a return of color and life, an echo of the bountiful fields of the Reach. Some scoffed at the frivolity of flowers in a time of rebuilding. Others took heart in the beautification efforts, seeing them as a symbol that peace could indeed return. Soon, the nickname Floral Empire was whispered in the taverns and shouted in the alleyways, half mocking yet half hopeful. The queen's retinue embraced it, turning it into a positive brand for her reign. The sigil of the Golden Rose flew proudly over the Red Keep. Yet no reign is without its challenges. One afternoon, as Margaery took an audience in the throne room, a fight broke out among the Stormlands lords who had arrived. They bickered loudly about who should hold the vacant seats once belonging to House Baratheon. Fists flew, curses resounded, and the Gold Cloaks had to intervene. Margaery had them brought before her. She rose from the Iron Throne, wearing a calm but stern expression, and reminded them that any future Lord or Lady of Storm's end must be recognized by the crown, and that their petty squabbles endangered the peace. She offered to have the seat temporarily supervised by a loyal steward until a suitable claimant could be chosen, but the lords balked. Only when she threatened to strip them of lands and titles did they finally bow their heads, chastened. She knew she would need to handle the Stormlands with care. A new monarchy was bound to face resentment and power grabs. Behind closed doors, Queen Margaery also confronted tensions with Randyll Tarly. Though loyal to House Tyrell, Lord Tarly took issue with a woman ruling alone. He voiced concerns that the realm needed a strong king to lead armies, not a queen. Margaery politely reminded him that if he challenged her authority, he risked not only Highgarden's wrath, but also the combined support of the lords who had voted for her at the Great Council. Tarly, scowling, eventually knelt and swore fealty, albeit grudgingly. She placated him by granting him additional authority over military readiness and border defenses in the Reach, giving him a sense of importance while keeping him far from the capital's daily affairs. As the weeks became months, the Tyrell hold on the throne solidified. In King's Landing, the small folk resumed something resembling normal life. Taverns boomed with gossip about the queen's dresses, always elegant yet modest, and her gardens, her visits to the orphanages, her new policies on trade. Many recognized that Margaery had been adept at winning hearts even before she wore a crown. Now, with actual power behind her, she appeared unstoppable. The old monarchy had died with Tommen Baratheon. A new monarchy, a Floral empire, stood in its place, one that promised, for the moment, a gentler rule. Still, the specter of future wars loomed. Whispers of the Targaryen dragons grew more frantic as travelers arrived with news from the east. The Iron Islands had a new ruler in Euron Greyjoy, and no one could predict his next move. The North was forging its own future under House Stark, preparing for horrors beyond the Wall. But within the walls of the capital, Queen Margaery Tyrell reigned, shrewd, graceful, determined. On an early morning several months into her reign, Queen Margaery awoke in her chamber in the Red Keep, gazing through the glass windows at the city bathed in dawn's light. She rose, donned a robe of green silk embroidered with golden roses, and walked out onto a small balcony where a potted rosebush, nurtured by her own hand, grew. She touched a rose petal gently. It was soft, fragile, yet alive. She breathed in its gentle fragrance, letting the hush of dawn settle around her. The city below was still waking, the streets growing noisy with merchants and tradesmen starting their day. She remembered how she had once dreamed of being queen, though never quite like this, never on her own merits but always through marriage. Now here she was, enthroned by a great council's consent, forging an alliance of necessity and ambition. The tasks ahead were daunting. She needed to keep her people fed and safe, to quell the endless rivalries that threatened to tear the realm apart, to face a possible invasion from across the sea, and to manage the North's uncertain loyalty. And beyond all that, she needed to ensure that she did not become as ruthless or despised as some of those who had sat upon the Iron Throne before her. Yet, as she looked out at the city, she felt a certain calm. She had learned from the tragedies of the past. She understood the power of symbols, like roses and feasts and generosity, and she also understood the necessity of vigilance. House Tyrell was not a house of conquerors like the Targaryens, nor was it famed for martial prowess like the Baratheons or the Starks, but it was a house that nurtured life, that provided abundance. She would make that the foundation of her reign, forging a Floral empire that turned away from the charred battlefields of the recent past. If that meant compromises, alliances of convenience, or even marriages to secure her hold, she would do it with the subtlety that had always been the Tyrell way. She closed her eyes, allowing the morning breeze to brush against her cheeks. A memory came to her of her grandmother Olenna, standing amidst the gardens of Highgarden, explaining how to care for certain rare flowers. They need a gentle hand, Olenna had said, but they also need pruning, so they do not choke themselves with their own tangled vines. Margaery exhaled softly. She would remember that balance. She would rule firmly but fairly, clipping away the diseased or poisonous branches that threatened the realm's well-being. That day, the court assembled for the first official session of what would become known as the Tyrell Parliament, an idea Margaery had borrowed from old records of how some regions governed themselves through councils of local lords and commoners. It was experimental, to be sure, but she believed that giving various factions a voice might reduce rebellions. A row of seats had been placed for selected representatives. Minor lords, knights, and even a handful of city guild leaders, who would advise on issues from trade tariffs to city repair works. Of course, Marjorie still held the final say, but the gesture of inclusion was not lost on her subjects. Ser Loras Tyrell stood by her throne, resplendent in the white cloak of the King's Guard, though he still bore scars from his imprisonment. His gaze swept the assembly warily, protective of his sister. On the other side stood Kevin Lannister, the Hand, scanning the crowd with a dignified but reserved air. Mace Tyrell and Garland Tyrell were present, as was the new Master of Coin, an unassuming but clever steward named Alistair Crane. They spoke of the city's rebuilding efforts, the ongoing distribution of bread, the rising price of steel, the reorganization of the City Watch, and the necessity of restoring roads to the outlying farmland. When a newly arrived group of ship captains brought news of increased pirate activity near the Stepstones, the Queen listened carefully, then tasked Mace Tyrell with dispatching a naval patrol to secure the trade routes. One by one, problems were discussed and delegated. It was a departure from the days when a king might have imposed arbitrary decisions or left the realm to suffer. Slowly, the idea of a monarchy that actually listened began to take root. Not all was harmony, of course. Dark rumors circulated that certain Lannister loyalists had retreated to the Westerlands, sullenly resenting the Tyrell ascendancy. The faith militant, though largely weakened, continued preaching in hushed gatherings, condemning Marjorie's multiple marriages as a sign of moral impropriety. Some even prayed for the Targaryen dragons to come cleanse the city. But these were, for the moment, muted voices. The majority, exhausted by war, latched onto the hope of a more benevolent regime. As the year progressed, the harvest from the Reach poured into King's Landing. The city expanded its trade networks under the Queen's guidance, forging new contracts with Bravos and Pentos. The Iron Bank, cautious yet enticed by Tyrell gold, agreed to refinance the Crown's debts at a lower interest rate, hoping to ensure stable trade for the future. Commerce flourished in a way it had not for years. Streets bustled with goods from across the narrow sea, and local merchants praised the Queen's policies. The Red Keep's rose gardens, carefully cultivated, blossomed in a riot of color, an emblem of what the small folk began to call the blooming. The Queen herself walked among the stalls of the city from time to time, unafraid to mingle with the people, always escorted by a retinue, but approachable enough that a common mother or a young child might speak to her of their troubles or joys. In Highgarden, Olenna Tyrell received letters detailing her granddaughter's progress on the throne. The Queen of Thorns smirked in satisfaction, sipping her wine as she read of the cunning maneuvers, the alliances brokered, and the improvements in the capital's conditions. She wrote back rarely, but when she did, it was to offer wry counsel. Watch for serpents among the flowers, my dear. A garden is never free of pests. Marjorie smiled at these letters, mindful of the truth in her grandmother's words. Some lords urged the Queen to wed again, to secure a proper consort and produce heirs, ensuring the succession. In council sessions, Mace Tyrell would loudly proclaim that a grand marriage alliance might bring further stability. Others whispered that a foreign prince might be a suitable match, forging a powerful union across the sea. Marjorie did not dismiss the idea entirely. She recognized the importance of an heir, but she was in no rush. Perhaps she recalled her ill-fated marriages to Joffrey and Tommen, or perhaps she simply enjoyed the autonomy that came from ruling alone. For the time being, she demurred. "The realm is my first priority," she would say. "When the time is right, the gods will guide us to the proper match." Her refusal to immediately remarry only added to her mystique. A queen in her own right, not a pawn for others. Beyond the city, certain corners of Westeros tested the new monarchy's strength. The mountain clans in the Vale, always a nuisance, began raiding the outskirts of the Eyrie, which was ruled by the child Lord Robert Arryn and his regents. Queen Marjorie extended the help of the Crown's forces to quell the raids, forging a bond with the Vale that further legitimized her authority. In the Stormlands, a group of rebels briefly attempted to rally under the banner of a supposed Baratheon bastard. Garland Tyrell led a swift campaign to disperse them, capturing their leader and bringing him to face the Queen's justice in King's Landing. She granted him mercy, sending him to the wall instead of executing him. This clemency softened hearts that had feared a new wave of executions might follow her rise to power. Over time, the realm settled into a precarious but growing stability. Old wounds did not vanish overnight, but the memory of the War of the Five Kings loomed like a cautionary tale, reminding lords and knights alike that further conflict would be disastrous. Trade thrived, harvests were distributed with moderate fairness, and the capital flourished under a wash of green and gold. Songs, half flattering and half satirical, abounded in taverns. Our queen's a rose, bright and bold, that prunes the weeds and guards the fold. Some joked that the Floral Empire was too pretty to last in the harsh world of Westeros. Others insisted that it might be exactly what the realm needed after so many years of war. Cersei Lannister rarely appeared in public during these months. She resided in a smaller set of chambers in the Red Keep, stripped of her titles except for the courtesy title Lady of Casterly Rock, though even that was a gesture at best. On one occasion, Margaery tried to visit her. The moment Margaery stepped into her chambers, Cersei glowered from the shadows, eyes full of loathing. Wine sloshed in her cup as she spat. "Come to taunt me, have you?" Margaery sighed. "No, my lady. I came to see if you required anything." Cersei's bitter laugh echoed off the walls. "As though you care," she sneered. "You have stolen my son's throne." "There was no throne left to steal," Margaery said gently, though there was steel beneath her tone. "Tommen is gone, Cersei. You know that. And the realm demanded leadership." Cersei hurled her goblet at the floor, shattering the wine cup. "Leadership," she spat. "A dancing rose who parades her beauty and generosity around the city, while my children lie in their graves. You are nothing but a usurper, no better than that Targaryen whore across the sea." Margaery did not flinch at the outburst. She merely breathed in, then out. "I am sorry for your loss, truly, but your rage will not bring them back. If you wish for a future for the Lannisters, you can work with me, or you can drink yourself into oblivion. The choice is yours." She turned and left, ignoring the shouts that followed. Later, Jaime Lannister appeared at court to half-heartedly apologize for his sister's behavior. Margaery noted the new lines of weariness in the Kingslayer's face, the disillusionment in his eyes. She accepted the apology with a gracious nod, letting him see that she bore him no open hostility. She did, however, keep a careful watch on Cersei, for though the lioness seemed defanged, Margaery remembered all too well the cunning cruelty that woman could wield. Through all these difficulties, public riots, private resentments, foreign threats, Queen Margaery Tyrell strove to maintain a careful balance. Be seen as benevolent, but never weak. Feed the people, but do not deplete the realm's wealth. Show mercy, but never let old feuds erupt unchecked. She relied heavily on her family, Loras's bravery, Garland's steady hand, Mace's boisterous ambition, Olenna's barbed wisdom, and even on Kevan Lannister's pragmatic counsel. Each month that passed without a new war was a small triumph in a kingdom long accustomed to bloodshed. At last, near the close of her first year on the throne, the queen summoned her council to discuss the looming question of Daenerys Targaryen. News had reached them that Daenerys had taken some portion of the Iron Islands fleet, perhaps allied with Yara Greyjoy, and was sailing toward Dorne. It was said the dragons soared overhead, striking fear into the hearts of sailors who glimpsed them. The question at hand was whether the crown should send emissaries or prepare for war. In the candlelit council chamber, Margaery sat at the head of the table. Garland Tyrell stood behind her, arms folded, while Kevan Lannister occupied a seat at her right hand. Mace Tyrell, Randall Tarly, Loras, and a few other key advisors were also present. Outside, the glow of torches in the hallway cast faint patterns across the door. "We cannot allow dragons to land in Dorne unchallenged," Randall Tarly said bluntly. "If she gains a foothold there, it's but a short march to the Stormlands. We must block her approach. Send the royal fleet." Mace Tyrell nodded vigorously. "Yes, indeed. We will show her the might of the new crown. She has no right to Westeros by birth or otherwise." Kevan Lannister cleared his throat. "With respect, my lords, she does have a blood claim, however distant. She is the daughter of the Mad King, after all." Some houses might rally behind her if she proves formidable. Marjorie tapped her fingers on the table. I do not wish to plunge the realm into another war of dragons and wildfire. Our navy is not strong enough to guarantee a victory at sea, especially if the Iron Fleet is with her. But we have the advantage of numbers on land. If it comes to open battle, we could hold her forces at bay, provided we keep the people's loyalty. She paused, glancing at the men around her. Yet, if she is not bent on conquest at any cost, perhaps we can negotiate. Tarly frowned. Negotiate? With a Targaryen who calls herself the Mother of Dragons? She styles herself a breaker of chains. Who is to say she will not burn this city to the ground? She might, Marjorie conceded. Or she might prefer to avoid the bloodshed if she can secure recognition. Let us at least send an envoy to Dorne, or wherever she lands, to ascertain her intentions. If she demands the Iron Throne, she must know I will not simply step aside. But perhaps we can find a compromise. Her council looked at her uncertainly. Some saw wisdom in a diplomatic approach, while others viewed it as naive. But ultimately, Marjorie was queen, and her word was law. They agreed to dispatch a small delegation of trusted envoys with letters for Daenerys Targaryen, offering a meeting on neutral ground to discuss the state of the realm. If the Targaryen queen refused outright and threatened war, the Tyrell forces would muster on the southern borders. If she was open to diplomacy, perhaps they could avert catastrophe. That evening, Marjorie retired to her chamber, exhausted from the day's deliberations. She stood at the window, eyes on the distant horizon. Dragons. The thought of facing living dragons unsettled her. She was no warrior. Her strengths lay in negotiation, charm, and statecraft. Yet if it came to a fight, she would not abandon her crown. The Floral empire she had begun to nurture in Westeros was fragile, but it was hers to protect. She laid a hand on her golden rose crown, resting on a velvet cushion near her bedside. The realm had entrusted her with its leadership. If she surrendered it without a fight, what message would that send? Still, she could not shake the feeling that there was more at stake than a mere clash of claims. Winter's chill grew each night. Reports from the north suggested unnatural horrors. The Targaryen queen, by many accounts, had freed slaves, ended tyrants in Essos, and was forging a new path. Did that not align with Marjorie's own ideals of a gentler monarchy? Perhaps, if they could set aside the question of who sat on the Iron Throne, they could unite against the greater threats looming beyond the horizon. Her reflection shimmered in the glass. A queen crowned with roses, presiding over a tenuous peace. She did not fool herself into believing all was well. She knew the road ahead was uncertain. But for the moment, at least, the people of King's Landing slept in relative peace. The bread lines were not bursting with violence. The city watch was not cowering in fear of the faith militant. The crown was not drowning in unpayable debts. The fields of the Reach continued to yield bounty, fueling commerce and filling granaries. And the realm, battered though it was, began to believe in the possibility of a future without constant war. In the hushed night, as she closed her eyes, Marjorie recalled the swirl of rose petals cast before her father's cavalry when he arrived in the city. She remembered how the small folk had murmured their thanks when she distributed bread, how the lords had chosen her over further chaos at the Great Council. This fragile empire, an empire of flowers, had taken root in the ashes of the past. Whether it could withstand the fire and ice that lurked on the edges of the world remained to be seen. Yet, for now, in that fleeting moment of calm before dawn, Queen Marjorie Tyrell and her Floral empire reigned, bringing a season of respite to a war-torn land. Though storms gathered beyond the horizon, in King's Landing, at least, the roses were in bloom. And that was more hope than Westeros had seen in many years.